Perfect. I just wanted to check, I have it unmuted, that everyone can hear us okay, that the audio is working. If you wanted to just put a message into this chat window, that would be great. Thank you, Brian. So it's June 14th, release of director's cuts. We've got new production numbers for April, and just kick it over to Lynn.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for those who came to the webinar and those who tuned in. We're talking about April 2019 production numbers and information behind them. So we'll spend a little time talking about them, and then we'll take questions. First of all, you can see the oil numbers are as close to flat as I can ever remember month to month. Less than 600 barrels a day difference, which is not even measurable on a percentage scale. I think it's 0.05% change in the oil production numbers. So you can see sort of the wait for it attitude of the industry that we're seeing right now in the April, May, and even the current attitude of industry. I do want to let everyone know that April production number is plus 10,000 barrels a day, or actually 11,000 barrels a day to the revenue forecast. So in terms of revenue forecasts, growth wasn't really anticipated or expected or baked into the revenue forecast, and we're 11,000 barrels a day positive to the revenue forecast. Interestingly enough, even though oil held virtually absolutely constant, natural gas went up almost 1%. So a new record in terms of natural gas production for the month of April. Now, there wasn't a lot of completion activity. We saw some improvement, and we'll talk about it in a minute in terms of gas capture, but not a lot of change there either, because April is not yet the construction season. What we think we were seeing was some easing in the weather impacts. Cold weather impacts gas production and gas gathering in odd ways, in that when the ground is extremely cold, like it was in January, February, and March, the gathering pipelines and the gathering infrastructure gets very cold. So water drops out of the gas and liquids drop out of the gas, and you lose capacity. It builds up in the pipes, and so it's not unusual to see those underground pipes half full or maybe more of water and liquids, and so that reduces the ability to produce and to gather the natural gas. And that's just not something that other places in the world experience. Only places that have so much seasonal change, like North Dakota, experience those kind of factors. In most places, it either gets cold and stays pretty cold, or it's warm and it stays warm. But we have those very large temperature swings that can cause things like that. So we saw some improvement in gas production and corresponding even more improvement in gas capture with no increase in oil production. New all-time high in terms of the number of producing wells. So again, we saw industry come back modestly with an increase in producing wells, meaning that they reduced the non-completed well count a little bit, and they reduced the inactive well count even more. So more even than in the completion scenario, we saw inactive wells being put back on stream. In terms of permitting activity, pretty much steady. Oil prices, as you know, just this last week have become a very significant concern. So when we look back to April, we were 10,000 barrels a day above revenue forecast and $11 a barrel above revenue forecast. So very healthy. April revenue should be very, very healthy in terms of state revenues. Likewise for May, it looks like the price was about $8 above forecast. Today, 15 cents. So the $10 drop that we've seen in oil prices over the last 10 days or so really puts us right at the revenue forecast numbers, not below, but right at them. So we had a healthy cushion March, April, May in terms of prices, we're now at revenue forecast prices. So we'll be watching that very closely. And industry is very concerned. I just had the opportunity this week to spend 2 days in Denver, visited a dozen CEOs of North Dakota operators. Surprising that, out of our top 25 or 30 operators, half of them are located in Denver. And so I had a chance to sit down with them and spend about an hour with each one, visiting about their thoughts, and very, very cautious at this point, very concerned about these oil prices and about the potential for oversupply and more deterioration in the prices. But pretty much the attitude of we're going to stay at the same number of drilling rigs, same number of completion crews, same number of completions as we move forward 2019 and 2020. Interestingly enough, one company, and I heard this kind of across the board, but I can tie into exact numbers from one company. They've seen a 20% improvement in drilling efficiency over the last year. So they're actually going to reduce the number of rigs from 5 to 4, but they expect to drill just as many wells. They're actually achieving 3 wells per month with the really solid rig count the rigs that they have operating have gotten so good at drilling the style of wells that they drill that each rig is now churning out 3 wells a month for them. And they've seen about a 30% improvement in frac efficiency. So they're going to be able to reduce from 3 frac crews to 2 and still keep up with those rigs. So they continue to improve in terms of efficiencies. That's good news for state revenues and state production, because even in a somewhat squeezed price environment, they're going to be able to maintain completions and should be able to maintain oil production. On the Fort Berthold Reservation, the activity mirrored statewide activity, just pretty flat. I think 1 less rig in April than there was in March. Pretty much flat production, both trust lands and fee lands. And in terms of completion activity, picked up a little bit in April over March, but March and February were very slow months because of the bad weather. So April still has not achieved what we would consider average for the year. Our expectation is that we'll have between 90 and 100 wells completed in a month, and the preliminary numbers for April show 78. Now that'll probably increase, but we're still not quite at annual averages. So come summer, I think we'll start to see above average, and we'll see some improvement in terms of production or increase in production. April is still a little too early to see any major impact on uncompleted wells or inactive well counts. Like I said, inactive 72 wells were put back on production, but we're still under frost laws in April. Now here is the funny thing about North Dakota there was a day right at the end of May when there were still frost laws on in parts of some counties, but the ambient temperature was above 90 degrees. So there were heat restrictions for load limits on some of the paved highways. So on the same day, the ambient temperature was above 90, and there were load restrictions on due to heat and load restrictions on due to frost. And that is the world that we live in. So you can kind of see, some of the challenges in terms of how things work in North Dakota. And so that was, I think, the last day of May, first day of June, that it was above 90 degrees and we still had frost laws in place. And that's just some of the things that make you kind of smile about North Dakota. Talking about gas capture, happy to report that gas capture jumped up 44 million a day, about a 1% improvement in gas capture. We will gladly take those incremental improvements in 2019, as we expect this build out of infrastructure to get us back into full compliance by the end of the year. But it's very nice to see that even early in the year, we're getting incremental improvements and we're moving back towards that 88% capture number, that gross number that we're after. So we'll be starting meetings with the midstream folks, our summer meetings with the midstream folks very soon. And so all of them will be coming in to talk to us. We're going to want to be asking them what their customers' gross gas capture numbers are and what they're going to do during this construction season to move those up. So we'll keep reporting on that as that happens. But the midstream gathering and processing companies will be starting to come in. I think a lot of what they're doing is focusing on this $2 billion worth of infrastructure that they have under construction and bringing it in on schedule by the end of this year. And so we'll be monitoring that very closely. Getting to the crude oil markets, again, back to the recent $10 drop, there is a lot of concern on the part of everyone about world supply and world demand. And OPEC is just getting ready to meet. We're starting to, hear some of the behind-the-scenes stuff as that meeting approaches. But what is beginning to appear in the crude oil market picture is that demand, with a slowing world economy, crude oil demand could increase about 1.4 million barrels a day over the next year. There is potentially 2.3 million barrels a day of supply that could come on. So we're going to be in a oversupply situation. And OPEC, the discussions they're having right now is how much to cut, how to allocate those cuts, and how to manage the oversupply from now until mid-2020. So that's the discussions that are going on there. And believe me, the North Dakota operators are watching that very, very closely and working on their capital plans for the rest of this year as well as budgets for next year. You may have noticed we shortened up the federal reports a little bit. There were a small number of federal activities that either nothing has happened for a significant period of time. If there's been nothing happening or there's nothing pending for the last year, we took them off the report. And so what you're reading about there now is either ongoing issues or things where there's still litigation or something like that moving through the courts, and any given month there could be some activity that would change the picture. So we removed a number of those things. We're still trying to restart the discussions with the BLM on gas capture regulation, but we do know that we sort of came to an impasse in terms of discussions with the BLM over deference to the state on gas capture. They have started active discussions with the 3 affiliated tribe, and so I think we're going to kind of just step back and let those negotiations move, since that particular part of North Dakota's production, that 25% of our production, is where our biggest difficulty with gas capture is. We're going to take a step back and let them work on it and see where that might go, and then we'll come back to the table unless something changes significantly on our side of the equation. So that's our report for June about April production. Questions?
Now, I'm going to start with one that we're going to go over probably some older ground. Noticing the price difference between North Dakota Light Sweet and WTI is almost $12 a barrel. Why is that?
Right. So the question from the room here is we now have seen the price differential between North Dakota Sweet and WTI expand significantly now back to about $12 a barrel. And I think I'm going to defer that one to Justin. He's signaling, we do these kind of like pitchers and catchers.
Yeah.
We got these hand signals, and he's signaling that he has a good answer for that. I anticipate that it has to do with what's going on in Cushing, Oklahoma, and some of the variability in crude oil that's showing up there, as well as what's happening in Canada. But we'll let Justin answer that, if that's okay, Dave. And
Sure.
I will. I'll make sure if you don't remember to ask Justin that we make him answer it. Thanks. But you're right. Very significant. I mean, we had been cruising along at substantially less than that, $5 and $6, and we had built into the revenue forecast $8 to $9 differential. But here we are at almost 12. So that is a significant concern and really needs to be watched. Mm-hmm.
Also kind of covering old ground again. Are we seeing any repercussions from being 7% under a gas capture goal currently?
Yeah, so the question here is repercussions from being 7% under the gas capture goal. And my answer would be unequivocally yes. So in the conversations, and the information is hard to get at because it's anecdotal and we really don't get reported to us exactly what operators are doing to try to adjust to that. But in the conversations with operators, one operator in particular has a massive well pad that, based on the well tests, would be capable of 50,000 barrels of oil a day, and they're producing at 17. And another operator has a 5-well pad where the wells have been drilled and they have simply postponed the completions till third or fourth quarter this year because there isn't gas capture infrastructure to pick it up. So again, that would be 25,000 barrels a day. So there are definitely impacts from being under, and the midstream companies are really, really feeling the pressure. Their customers, the operators, are deeply unhappy with the infrastructure delays, and so they're all hands on deck. I am happy to report that the folks that are building the natural gas liquids pipeline, Elk Creek, say that everything at this point is on schedule, and that thing is going to come on the end of this year. But we're seeing, for example, the gas plant at Watford City is actually not going to be able to come on at full capacity right away. It's going to have to stage its increasing capacity because of the inability or the lack of natural gas liquids takeaway capacity and that sort of thing. So it really is inserting itself into the oil patch in many, many ways, in terms of reduced desire for drilling rigs, reduced desire for completion crews, delayed completions, wells being tested and then choked back. Yeah, so production could be substantially higher if we had the capture capacity.
On that same note, I'll follow up with a question that has come in. Department of Commerce recently sent out a press release related to the Bakken midstream and gas capture investments there. Are we encouraged, I guess, by those investments and kind of how that may impact?
Mm-hmm. So again, you may want to ask Justin the same question, because that's kind of a midstream downstream. But to answer the question directly, it's very encouraging. Now, what I have to caution is that's 3 to 5 years away for that to enter the picture and have a real-time impact. But 3 to 5 years away, we have a significant problem looming, and that is that even the Elk Creek and the Elk Creek expansion are full 3 to 5 years away, as is our gas export capacity full 3 to 5 years away. So having something like Bakken midstream in the planning or even the discussion stages to enter the market 3 to 5 years from now and help solve that export capacity problem is fantastic news. Yeah. So very encouraging, and we hope that the capital markets will see it the same way and say, yes, this is a value-added, jobs-oriented solution for North Dakota to some of the big product export problems that we have, and get behind it, fund it, and get it built. It looks like we've got the supply they need, and we've got some of the infrastructure they need, and we've got the geology they need. So I think most of the issues, if they can get the contracts and find a market for the products, all the other issues we're helping them through.
Related to production, I had a question that was emailed in to me for halfway through calendar year, but production just for April. Is there any new update or feeling of what the end of the year production may look like?
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell. And I would have been much more optimistic a week ago. But having spent time now with half of our operators, the attitude or idea is that growth is going to be small and slow. That with the current oil price environment, that rapid growth is just not possible, and the money or the cash flow isn't there to easily overcome the obstacles like gas capture and workforce and that sort of thing. So it's sort of like the triple combo. If we had high oil prices, we would find a way to overcome gas capture and workforce. But with gas capture, workforce, and lower oil prices, the attitude is we're going to grow production, but in small increments. So I think it's a bit too early to tell. Now, if OPEC comes out with a really awesome plan and oil prices rebound, that could certainly change. So stay tuned.
Along the same line, what are you hearing from the markets about the attacks on tankers out there in the Middle East?
So question from the room was, what do the markets say about the attacks on tankers? And it is of obvious concern because it can create 2, 3, 5% changes in oil price. The amazing thing is, with the ability, with almost 1,000 uncompleted wells in North Dakota and more than twice that number in Texas, and the ability to ramp production up almost 2.5 million barrels a day, the market seems to yawn at things that 15 years ago would have caused lines at the gas pumps, and huge concerns around the world. It would have rippled through the world economy as a supply scare. There is the ability to increase shale oil production easily enough that the market doesn't get anywhere near as excited as it used to about things like that. So yeah, 2, 3, maybe a 5% jump and drop back down, but nothing like what would have happened 15 years ago in a demand-driven oil economy.
Any other questions for Lynn?
Thanks. Don't forget to ask Justin.
Oh yeah. He's warned. He's forewarned.
He's forewarned. Yeah.
Perfect.
Ready on? Well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Krinkstead, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. Getting in, following up on Lynn's comments about North Dakota, Eastern Montana, South Dakota. Again, little to no change month over month. The entire basin itself producing right around 1.45 million barrels per day. And that is the amount of crude oil that is in the oil transportation network that needs to be delivered out of this region to refining centers around the U.S. and globe. When we look at slide 4, the top portion of this graphic, again, month over month change in oil, as Lynn alluded to, almost invisible on the far right side of that graphic. Natural gas did see a small increase, but again, nowhere near the type of growth rates that we've seen historically. And you heard the comments from Lynn as to what was taking place that led to those monthly changes. Some small changes on the crude transportation dynamics. Again, the total volume of barrels didn't really change. We did see some shuffling of how those barrels are being marketed. A small increase in the amount of volume leaving the region by rail car. So about a 2% increase in the estimated rail volumes out of North Dakota. Again, very little change over the last number of months. The market has been fairly static. We've seen some increase in production, but again, the overall fundamentals North America wide about the Brent WTI spreads have been fairly consistent, somewhere in that $7 to $10 range. Again, that is a scenario that leads uncommitted barrels in North Dakota to look at rail as an option for being marketed either at the West Coast, East Coast, or Gulf Coast. Again, as I alluded to earlier, just a small increase, about 20,000 barrels per day, leaving North Dakota by rail in April. Somewhere in that neighborhood now, about 280,000 barrels per day. So you can see how this has definitely been changing and fluctuating as the market conditions, production rates, transportation options have changed over the last number of years in the region. Where those barrels are headed, again, the Pacific Northwest continues to be the dominant destination. About 60% of North Dakota's oil leaving by rail is headed west. The remainder, about a third, headed towards the East Coast refineries. Again, those two regions are typically, if they're not being serviced by rail volumes, heavily dependent upon waterborne barrels, typically from foreign locations. And so, again, these domestic barrels looking at those regions as homes for that crude oil. We look at the pricing dynamics in March. Highest prices, East and West Coast, PADD 1, PADD 5, about $1 difference between the two. But we're seeing a little bit of a widening in the gap between PADD 1 and 5 and the Gulf Coast. There's a lot of pressure being headed towards the Gulf Coast, production out of North Dakota, production out of the Permian, other Texas regions. In the next number of years, we're going to continue to see more export options opening up in the Gulf Coast, so that will likely decrease that spread and increase the value for that oil, particularly the light sweet barrel like North Dakota down in that Gulf Coast. And we'll talk in a moment about a project that was just announced here this week. Look at the pricing today, $9.30 spread WTI to Brent. Again, I don't anticipate when we come back in August and look at the June numbers, they'll likely stay very consistent. We're still going to see barrels electing to move out by rail car when the numbers come out. And very typical type numbers in the import exports between North Dakota and Canada, so nothing too concerning or interesting on that front. So slide 12 now is looking at my overall production forecast. I have what I call my case 1 and case 2. Case 1 is what I consider an expected scenario. It's based upon the EIA's oil price forecast. The EIA just updated that information on the 11th of this month, and so I used that new short-term price deck along with their long-term outlook to put together a forecast for activity and production in the region. And case 2 is a scenario that assumes same price deck but lower activity, that for one reason or another, whether it's regulatory issues, whether it is interest or additional activity in other parts of the U.S., but for one reason or another, case 2 assumes that the activity in North Dakota is lower than would typically be expected. If you look at the green portion of this slide, that is existing pipeline and refining capacity in the region. In yellow, you're going to notice two projects. You have the Davis Refinery at 49,500 barrels per day, and then the Liberty Pipeline System that was just got the green light this week to move forward. Somewhere between 175,000 to 200,000 barrels per day is expected to be the capacity for our region on that system. It is a larger system, but it's expected to pick up additional barrels in other Rockies production areas, so Wyoming, potentially Colorado, as that system moves towards Cushing, Oklahoma. At Cushing, those barrels would have obviously existing outlet options, but Phillips 66 Plains are putting together an additional project called the Red Oak Pipeline System, which would deliver oil not only from Cushing, but also the Permian down to several Gulf Coast centers, either for local refining or export. When we look at the impact of that system on the overall transportation dynamics in the region, you'll notice that as we sit today, production does exceed pipeline capacity. And long term, my expectation is that North Dakota's oil will reach over 2 million barrels per day. And so with Liberty, that would take North Dakota and the region's pipeline capacity to about 1.55 million barrels per day. We're still projecting a long-term shortfall. Liberty is going to be a very key project as we continue to build out this infrastructure in ensuring that North Dakota's oil has markets down in the central and Gulf Coast regions of the U.S. So again, a very, very important project for the region as we look at the long-term outlook. I do know that other companies are certainly looking at, again, other capacity expansions in the region, and that's good news because long-term we know that we're going to need even more projects out of this region, whether it's expansions of existing or new greenfield projects in order to meet growing volumes here in the Williston Basin. Switching gears now to natural gas, 19% flaring, 81% capture. Percentages, we saw a small shrinkage on that flaring from unconnected wells, a consistent 16% of the gas being flared from connected facilities. When we look from December to April now, some good news is that we're seeing a decrease in the amount of flaring from unconnected wells. Again, wells are getting connected, but the systems are just congested, and they're not able to move all of that gas to the plants as hoped. Gas connection rates, very positive last couple months with gas connections outpacing new wells producing gas. So that is additional good news. And when we look now longer term at the processing plant capacity. So this is going to be the situation for 2019. Our natural gas production in the region does exceed plant capacity, and it will until late this year when additional investments that are under construction today do come into service. When we look long-term, my expected scenario shows very robust natural gas growth in the region. There are a number of projects and things that are in the works that aren't shown on this graphic yet. They're not publicly available at this time, but I do know with certainty that companies are looking at the next set of processing solutions for the region, which is encouraging. I expect within the next 3 to 6 months, some of those details will likely start emerging, and we'll start to get a better picture of what this infrastructure will look like in the year 2020, 2021 to help us get a better sense of how this gas capture situation is going to continue to work itself out. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
So I'll renew my question again.
Yes.
So looking at the price today, it's almost $12 a barrel between WTI and North Dakota Light Sweet. What is causing this? What are the factors?
So the figure that you're quoting, the number that I'm using currently is closer to about a $5 to $6 differential between North Dakota. The last official numbers for April were $4.60 some odd cents discount between the official North Dakota pricing at the wellhead versus WTI. There are different pricing sources that may have higher, lower, different fluctuating numbers, but I think overall my estimate for the current situation is closer to that $5 or $6 scenario. The last number of days we've actually seen a little bit of price improvement at the Clearbrook location. The numbers I've been hearing and seeing are a little less than $1 difference between WTI and Clearbrook, so there has been some good news on that front. However, when we look long term, shouldn't say long-term, almost shorter term, second half of 2019, and there's going to be continued pressure on the pricing scenario in North Dakota. If production continues to ramp up over the summer months, the next major refining or pipeline systems are still a couple of years away. That may put some additional pricing pressure on the region. So we'll continue to watch that very closely and see how that plays out.
Another follow-up.
Yeah.
There was a mention earlier, I think the figure is $2 billion in terms of infrastructure that's coming on this year. Can you give us a rough breakdown of where that is? How much is pipeline? How much is plant? Natural gas?
Okay, so the natural gas side, yeah. So for 2019, I don't have the breakdown 2019, 2020, but I know it's a little over $4 billion in the next 2 years of infrastructure coming online. And that's a combination of processing facilities as well as the associated gathering systems, compressor stations leading up to those gas processing plants. Another big chunk of that is the Elk Creek NGL pipeline system that Lynn had mentioned earlier. That will be a very critical piece of infrastructure. A year ago, 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that NGL takeaway capacity would have become as big of an issue as it was so quickly. But from what I'm hearing out in the field, it is a very valid near-term challenge for our gas gathering and processing industry. We are seeing about 100,000 plus barrels per day of NGL leaving by rail car, but there is substantial pressure on that network for NGL movements and capture here in the region.
To follow up then, is that demand driven for NGLs?
So NGL, it's going to be more supply driven. So the amount of NGLs that are produced in North Dakota are substantial. They're very, very rich natural gas resources, meaning very high in ethane content, propane, butane, and much higher than many other places around the world. And so it becomes a challenge quicker in North Dakota than anywhere else.
So you said, go ahead.
I was going to say the other question that we had was around the Bakken midstream announcement that could also come out as well, and just if there was any in regards to investment encouragement on kind of what that might bring in the future.
Yeah, very encouraging. I do work extremely closely with that group and making sure that they have all the support they can from my office, and so I look forward to continuing working with them. I know a lot of that information is still confidential at this point as far as what that's going to look like in the coming years, but it is very, very encouraging to see that next phase of maturing for North Dakota's natural gas industry.
No, just you said $4 billion over 2 years.
Correct.
How do you have any rough guess about how that's going to affect the flaring?
When we look, I apologize for using a graphic for.
That's all right.
Let me pull it up and I'll comment on it. There we go. So slide 16 for those of you on the webinar. When we look forward, the amount of investment that's coming on the natural gas gathering and processing should make a very substantial dent in the natural gas flaring in the region. By late this year and early next year, we expect over a billion cubic feet of additional natural gas processing to come online. That will have an immediate impact. The expectation is that the majority of the new gas plants coming online will be full almost from day one. They're at the same time as the plant is being constructed, the associated gathering and compression facilities are also being constructed. So as quickly as those come online and they can get them commissioned, there will be a substantial amount of gas ready to get into those systems.
Any other questions for Justin?
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I can't think. It just went.
All right.
I didn't want to be a